It's Sunday night. I'm Karima Brown, and this is The Fix. Our big hitter tonight, Minister Pravin Gordhan.
State-owned enterprises have a crucial role to play.
Can he save our state-owned companies? As President Ramaphosa hits that 100-day mark.
So help me God.
Former President Zuma hits the skids. My panel of journalists looks at what you'll be talking about Monday morning. And from high finance to haute cuisine, Chef Lens Wibengu tells us why he swapped careers. Welcome to our debut show. This is The Fix, where every Sunday night, without fear or favor, we question the big hitters. We will look ahead to tell you what will be making news. And beyond politics, we look at the cool stuff South Africans are talking about. We begin with our very first big hitter. Joining us on our very first program, Minister of Public Enterprises, Pravin Gordhan. Minister, good evening. A big welcome to our debut show.
Good evening, and I'm certainly not a big hitter, but go ahead.
Well, you might probably be called a fixer in many languages, and of course you're the man at the cutting edge of saving our state-owned companies. But it's one thing rescuing them, it's quite another thing saving them. We saw Standard & Poor's not changing their rating. What have you not done yet to convince them that you've turned the corner?
Well, we are at the very early stages of the process of repositioning and, in a sense, reconstructing the way in which SOEs operate. So we've changed a number of boards, whether it was Eskom that was in January, and subsequently Transnet, SA Express, Denel. Others, like Minister Nzimande, has changed the PRASA board. And so there's a clean broom that's sweeping through the boardroom, so to speak. Secondly, we've got rid of some of the individuals responsible for malfeasance. Particularly, you see it in the case of Eskom, where 6 out of 8 of the senior managers involved in one or other form of malfeasance have either been through a disciplinary process or have chosen to resign on the eve of a disciplinary process. Thirdly, we, together with the Treasury, are looking at the finances, which is at the heart of the problem of institutions like Eskom, SA Express, Denel, and pretty much some of the others as well. And in the next few weeks, we'll get some package together which would work with the private sector and use government resources in a limited but proper way so that we can position them. But ultimately, we have 2 things to do. One is to go back to the past and hold people responsible for malfeasance accountable. And the second is in the future, which is where it's necessary to reposition these entities, as the President said. Then we begin that process with the boards and management teams as well.
Now, of course, you said we must go back to the past. Now, tomorrow we know, of course, that the asset forfeiture unit is going to be in court with some individuals, including a nephew of the Guptas, who apparently returned back to South Africa to stand trial. And it's a do-or-die case for the asset forfeiture unit. You have been leading that chase against state capture. We've seen the Guptas, the rest of the brothers in the wind. We have the one returning. Your comment on the fact that he's in fact come back?
Well, I hope he's brought some baggage with him, and that in the baggage are his uncles, because they are the ones who have a lot to account for, both in South Africa and elsewhere in the world, notwithstanding all the fancy rhetoric that we actually hear from them. And I suppose for the asset forfeiture unit and the NPA, this is a very early but small but equally important test case. If we pull this off, it begins to set a precedent for other bigger cases with larger sums of money involved to move in a similar direction, but also importantly demonstrate, again as the President said, that whilst the State Capture Commission begins its work, any prosecution or other legal action that needs to be taken immediately must in fact be taken and not held in abeyance. And I suppose this is just one example of that, and we expect a lot more. to come through.
Okay, so we've touched a little bit on the fact that the law enforcement agencies are doing their job, the commission is beginning to get underway. But the key thing here, of course, is that you need to convince financiers, both locally and domestically, that these state-owned companies are viable, they are worth investing in. If we look, for example, at the planned merger between SAA, Mango, and SA Express, we saw today in the Sunday Times the expose there of the levels of corruption that is going on. You are not going to be able to do that, Minister, without job losses. We've got trade unions that have huge stakes in our economy, and of course we've got unemployment rates that are incredibly worrying. How are you going to merge those three airlines without losing jobs?
Well, that's the discussion I'm starting this week with partner departments like the Treasury, so that we look at some of the evaluation that has already been done by a consulting firm almost 18 months ago, and ask ourselves the question, which are the areas amongst these airlines that you can rationalize, which are the areas where you could use one another's resources, and in fact, long before we start the discussion, we've actually had this happening in action. SA Express is grounded, and SAA management have really come to the party to take on passengers, redirect them to other flights, and even put on certain flights where they wouldn't traditionally actually do that. So that's a good example of working together. And there are areas where we will have to ask the question, is this worth keeping within the government family, or is it better dealt with elsewhere? They're also changing patterns, and I think a lot more of that needs public exposure. You know, the world doesn't remain static. In the electricity field, 10 years from now, the way grids operate will be very different from today, not just because of renewables, but because of the way in which energy is going to be distributed and transmitted in different ways in different countries. If you take the airline industry, I've just been doing some reading on that. Low-cost airlines are beginning to play quite an important part, firstly within countries, secondly within regions, but even thirdly now on international routes as well, which means the kind of value proposition that airlines offer, and therefore the cost structure with which they operate, is also changing quite fast as well. So I think it's important, while you're fixing things, to also fix the public's knowledge of how trends are changing and how we will need to adapt. So there are areas where we can save costs, and obviously staffing is one very important part of that cost. But we'll have to sit down with all of our partners, show them the numbers, show them what is actually happening, and hopefully come to a constructive arrangement about whatever it is that we need to do.
Minister, I'm going to come back to the question of how you're going to manage the stakeholders and the issue around staffing and potential job losses. But here's one of the questions that I've been burning to ask you. And of course, you've been speaking about the fact that people who serve on these boards need to have the capacity, the training, the experience, the know-how, and you've put really interesting mixes together. But you're also a member of the African National Congress's National Executive Committee. In fact, you've just come back from its meeting. And you have a very powerful deployment committee headed up by the Deputy President, David Mabuza. How much instruction did you get from the deployment committee to put certain individuals on these boards? If one looks, for example, at someone like Ronald Lamola, powerful NEC member, he's on the board of SA Express. If one looks at Denal Spiwenyanda, he's not on the NEC, but a very big power in the party. Someone like Sue Rabkin in Denal. How did you balance your cadre deployment issues vis-a-vis the fact that you need skilled people and people who can actually bring these SOEs to efficiency and to, of course, make a profit?
Well, I think the singular criterion is, do they have a contribution to make? And in each of the three cases you've mentioned, they have persuasive contributions to make. So, yes, the deployment committee has a voice, but I think the Deputy President understands very clearly that we're in a process of reconstruction, and every one of us will have, more than likely, a membership card in our back pockets. But that shouldn't influence the way in which we apply our professional knowledge and execute our fiduciary duties. So Ronald Lamola is a practicing lawyer of 10 years. He's got 2 masters, in particular a master's in corporate law. And one of the things we need to do as South Africans now is stop having 60-year-olds like myself and others on boards, but also set aside a few places so that we get the intergenerational mix, but it's an intergenerational mix that's actually based on professional knowledge that they can actually contribute. The other 2 colleagues that you've mentioned, both, the one has served Sue Rapkin, 3 ministers of finance in an advisory capacity, and has developed a knowledge about the Defence Force, which used to be the major customer of Denel, and we hope to return to that position once again. Siphiwe Nyanda was head of the National Defence Force, and he brings that knowledge with him as well. So in each of those boards, one of the things that we've been very meticulous at is to have people who have business knowledge.
Absolutely. Minister, hold that thought. Now, of course, here on The Fix, we like contrasting views. So after the break, columnist Peter Bruce, a man I respect but often disagree with, will join me. Both of us will question the minister. We'll be right back.